Hey everybody, what is going on? My name is Anthony. Welcome to the VR Game Rankings YouTube channel. Welcome to a very special episode of our show. This is not the weekend wrap-up. This is a pre-E3 special where we are going to focus very specifically on Xbox and VR. Microsoft, what's your deal? What is going on with Xbox and VR? We are mere days away from E3 2018, and one of the big questions in the VR gaming industry is this the year when Microsoft finally throws its hat into the console VR game? Or is this another year where Microsoft says, thanks, but no thanks, we're going to pass, we're going to sit over here on the sidelines, we'll check you out next year? Are they going to do that, or are they going to have a VR headset arrive later this year for their Xbox One X console? That's what we're going to look into today on this particular episode. So basically, one of the things that we need to start off with is let's go back in time a little bit and let's consider Microsoft in general, and let's consider what their strategy has been in relationship to virtual reality and to augmented reality as well, because basically Microsoft decided to back a different horse. Microsoft really was not very much in the camp of virtual reality all this time. They were backing AR, and it started off with their HoloLens project, which was officially unveiled back in January of 2015. And so basically, ever since the arrival of HoloLens, Microsoft has been asked, they have been queried, Microsoft, what is the deal? What is your thoughts on VR? Why do you not have a VR product? Where's VR for the Xbox? Microsoft has been asked this many times, and Microsoft has kind of said that basically they kind of feel like AR is where things are going, but that they're kind of taking a wait and see approach. They're going to let, basically one of the things they talked about is they thought that VR needs to incubate in the PC space for a number of years potentially before then making the transition to console. In fact, Phil Spencer himself has said a number of times that the Xbox is a living room product, and that in the living room there are different rules. There's different things that you have to think about. You have dogs and cats that walk across the living room floor. You have grandma that walks across and sits on the couch. You got to think about these things. And one thing that Phil Spencer has talked about a number of times is he feels that all of the wires that come along with VR could possibly be problematic. So Microsoft has kind of talked about maybe waiting for a wireless solution to come, and then that could be their new VR solution for the Xbox platform. But basically, we've been wondering for a long time, what is Microsoft doing here? What is their strategy? Why are they basically leaving the entire console market to Sony? And that's a major question to think about, because the truth of the matter is, in the year 2016, Sony released PlayStation VR, and they basically had the entire console VR market all to themselves in fall of 2016. Sony has had the entire console VR market all to themselves for the entire year of 2017, 365 days, and so far we are about halfway through 2018, and Sony has had the entire market all to themselves again for the entire year of 2018 so far. And is Microsoft going to finally change this? Are they going to release a peripheral for their Xbox One X platform that will provide VR to some of their biggest supporters? Because you got to understand, look, there are some tried and true Xbox fans that have probably been very interested in VR, but these people are bread and butter Xbox supporters. These people bleed green. These people don't have a PlayStation 4 in their house. Instead, they have multiple Xbox One X's. These are hardcore Xbox fanboys. They do exist, and these guys, some of them probably would like to have a VR solution. Some of them back in 2016 probably wanted a VR solution. Many of them in the fall of 2017 definitely thought they would get it then. That didn't happen. And now there's a number of them that would love to have a VR solution later this year. But is Microsoft going to come to play? Or is Microsoft going to say, thanks, but no thanks, we're actually going to sit over here on the sidelines? And so the question that we got to ask is, why would Microsoft concede this entire market to Sony? Why would Microsoft allow Sony to gain such a tremendous foothold? They're basically allowing Sony to snatch up beachfront property in the console VR market, and Microsoft seems to be perfectly content to allow Sony to run rampant in this particular category with no response whatsoever from Xbox. There is no VR solution for Xbox. And if we look at Nintendo as well, Nintendo has no VR solution either. So is Microsoft making a tremendous mistake here? Or is this a very intelligent gamble on their part? And the thing about it is, I have to really remove myself emotionally from this question as somebody that is a major supporter of VR, somebody that has backed VR from the very beginning, somebody that is a true die-in-the-wool believer of virtual reality and the potential of virtual reality. I have to set all of that over to the side, and I have to think about this thing rationally from a business standpoint. And to be completely honest about the situation, this has been a stroke of genius from Microsoft for a number of different reasons. Number one, just think of the massive investment that it would require for Microsoft to bring out a VR peripheral for their Xbox platform. You're talking about a ton of money that would be spent on research and development to try to bring a product to market. It's one thing to have your labs and to work on things in the background, which Microsoft is working on with no questions whatsoever. It's one thing to do that. It's another thing entirely to actually plan on bringing a product to market, a product that you'll probably be selling worldwide, a product that you really need to stand behind, and a product that you really need to believe in. And then there's the other aspect of it. One thing that we fail to remember about when it comes to virtual reality in general is there is a liability issue here. HTC Vive, HTC themselves, Oculus, Facebook, Valve, any company, Sony, that is very involved in VR at this point, they are taking somewhat of a risk. There is a liability risk here. Remember, people, we are literally blocking someone's vision. We're blocking their sound. We're blocking two of the most important physical senses that human beings have. And then in addition to all of that, we're now having a cable run down their back and across their floor, yet their vision is completely blocked and they can't hear anything as well. That sounds like a recipe for disaster, and I have to admit that if I'm a company that is making a huge bet in VR, I have to consider the liability aspect. Now, so far, luckily, we really haven't had too many VR-related tragedies along these lines. However, VR hasn't really gotten out to the great unwashed masses in a major degree. Sony has done most of the effort in this regard. They do have 2 million VR headsets established worldwide, probably heading near 2.5 million, I'd have to imagine, at this particular point in time. So it is starting to get out there. We know that there are millions of Google Cardboard and Gear VR type devices that are out there as well. And luckily, the number of tragedies, VR-related tragedies, have been very slim. We do know of somebody in Russia that unfortunately was wearing a VR headset. They tripped and fell, and they actually severed a major artery, I believe, in their neck and basically bled out. And it was just kind of a random accident, but it's kind of surprising that more of that hasn't happened. Liability is a concern. Another major concern that these companies have is support. If you bring out any kind of a product, you've also got to support that product. And sometimes you could have a product like VR that has so many little variables to it, and it's such a new thing, and it's such a radical new switch that the support that you're going to have to provide to all of the consumers that pick up this VR device, you have the possibility for motion sickness. You have different people that are going to put on the VR device and they're going to feel like they got motion sick or this or that. So you're going to have complaints. You're going to have a lot of people contacting support, trying to figure out how do things work, where do things go. There's a lot of different wires that need to be plugged in, a lot of different locations. This is an attachment. This is something that is being added on later. It's not being designed with everything being squared away perfectly in the very beginning. So support for a product like this is paramount. And Microsoft knows if they were to bring out a product, a VR product, they've got to provide support for that product as well. And so you have to consider all of these factors. And so Microsoft has stayed on the sidelines, and they've basically been a spectator, really, and they've allowed Sony to be the primary player in this game, and they've watched Sony from the sidelines and basically had a hands-off approach when it comes to VR. Now, is Microsoft making the smart move here, or are they really missing out? And it's really kind of a debatable situation, but honestly, I personally believe that the drought for console VR from an Xbox standpoint, unfortunately, is going to continue. I do not expect Microsoft to announce a brand new VR headset at this year's E3. Now, I know in the past, my predictions were different. In the past, I predicted that Microsoft would have a VR headset at some point, and I probably predicted that this E3 would finally be the time, because last year, of course, was the arrival of Xbox One X. You're already asking your fan base to spend $400, $500 something on an Xbox One X console. You're not going to ask them at the same exact time to shell out another additional $450 or whatever it might be for a VR headset. So I knew that wasn't going to happen last year when I finally came to the realization of that. And I probably predicted that this E3 would be the time where it would happen. And you know what? Maybe it could have been if VR really took off and was explosive with the sales, and if the hype was there, and maybe if Ready Player One resonated on a really high level. And when I'm talking about Ready Player One resonating on a really high level, I'm talking like Avatar level. Do you remember what Avatar did for 3D TVs and for the proliferation of the 3D TV concept? Avatar was absolutely huge. That single individual movie sold a ton of 3D televisions worldwide just based off of that individual movie. And if Ready Player One had just half the impact that Avatar did, it could have propelled the VR industry in a major way. It could have forced Microsoft's hands, but I believe Microsoft is not being forced to bring VR to their console market. They're not being forced, and they're going to choose to remain on the sidelines because they're going to look at this situation from a logical perspective. They know that they can only bring out a VR headset for their Xbox One X, and they know that the Xbox One X has only sold to a very limited number of people so far, and there's only a limited subset of those people that would end up buying the VR peripheral. The market is simply too small. They're not going to do it. So this is going to be another E3 with no VR announcements from Microsoft. And personally, I don't blame them. We are currently dealing with the trough of disillusionment in the VR industry. And so all the hype has mostly kind of faded away. Microsoft was under much more pressure in previous years, but the pressure has kind of slipped away, especially when you see headlines such as CCP Games basically leaving the VR game and things of that nature. Microsoft can point to that and say, look, the VR industry just isn't doing quite what we would have liked it to do to introduce a VR headset to the Xbox. So I do not believe we are going to get a VR headset for Xbox this year. In fact, not only that, but I personally believe that if Microsoft is really logical about this whole thing, they're probably going to decide that this entire console cycle, the Xbox One / Xbox One X console cycle, they will not have a VR product for this particular console cycle. I believe they will wait for their next console cycle. And I think a big part of this is they want wireless in the living room. They want their console, they want their VR headset to have inside out tracking and wireless. They want it to be a standalone headset. Phil Spencer has talked repeatedly about how this is a living room product and you don't want to have wires running all around the living room. Again, it goes back to the liability issue. It goes back to a support issue as well with having all these wires running all around. And so if Microsoft can continue to delay VR on Xbox, they can basically wait for an entire new generation of Xbox to then jump on the VR bandwagon, and I expect that's what's going to happen. So I personally don't believe there will be any VR on Xbox in 2019 nor in 2020 either. I think we're actually looking at potentially November of 2021, possibly with an Xbox, whatever they're going to call it, the next Xbox in November of 2021. Maybe there will be a standalone wireless VR headset that will launch side by side and will take Xbox into the VR era. Very late indeed. They have absolutely conceded the market to Sony, and some people might think, oh my God, Microsoft is crazy. They've let Sony have all of 2016, all of 2017. They're going to let them have all of 2018, all of 2019. That just sounds absolutely ludicrous, but I truly believe that's going to happen, and Microsoft is letting it happen because there just isn't that much pressure. They're just not that concerned by it. Sony, in true reality, Sony is not really making money hand over fist over this. All of the investment that Sony has had to deal with in terms of research and development, all of the investment that they've had to deal with in terms of getting studios aboard and working on VR games, I bet that they've barely broken even. We do have a lot of PSVR owners that buy virtually every VR game that comes down the pipe. They have 50 games in their library. There are a lot of incredibly passionate PSVR players, but they're probably in the great minority. And even though we do have possibly 2.5 million PlayStation VR headsets installed worldwide, it still just is a drop in the bucket when you consider the overall population of how many PlayStation 4s there are, period. It's still a very tiny fraction, and it just isn't worth it for Microsoft. So basically, that's my prediction. I'm sorry that it isn't more positive and upbeat, but basically that's the way I see it. I'm going to call it the way I see it, and who knows, maybe in a couple of days I will have to eat an incredible major plate of crow. I personally don't think it's going to happen, but I would love to be wrong. I would love Microsoft to enter this game. I don't expect it, but we're going to have to see. Now, one of the questions you guys might have is, Anthony, I like this episode. This was cool, but what about the weekend wrap-up? Are you still going to do that? Well, I hope to still do a weekend wrap-up later this week, but it's probably going to come on Sunday, and it's probably going to be considerably shorter. In fact, I can tell you right now, it is probably going to be at least half the length of my normal weekend wrap-ups. But, you know, I just felt like I had to bang this out. I had to speak upon the Xbox VR situation. What is going on with Microsoft? What is the deal with VR and Microsoft? And so I had to do this, had to get this out there. And I think everything will work out just great. So stay tuned. Weekend Wrap Up will still be coming this Sunday, but a very abbreviated version. All right, folks, I will see everybody then. Take it easy. Later.